Welcome.
Welcome.
Today we're talking about depression.
Yay.
The phenomenon of depression, from dysthymia to bipolar, how we understand it and how we heal it.
Yes.
And we're going to start today's episode with your personal story, which I'm really pleased that you are willing to share.
Yeah. I have an intimate relationship with depression, and I'm excited about this episode. I mean, I'm always excited about all of them because this is, I'm really passionate, like you are, about mental health. But this is my particular wheelhouse. I have a lot of experience with depression. So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to dive into my story, and then we're going to start to break it down, and we're going to lay out a path that I used, that I have certainly brought to many clients who are struggling with the whole spectrum of different kinds of depression that we can experience, and that I really want to bring to as big an audience as I possibly can, because we can absolutely heal from depression.
You are listening to Magenta FM, Season 2, The Art of Mental Health.
We will bring some lesser known and some downright strange approaches to consider and explore.
We'll draw from our own experiences with healing and from our work helping others, plus our research into little-known fields of inner development.
We'll share tools and practices that help us heal and put the power and agency to heal back in our own hands.
This podcast and YouTube show represents the opinions of Rachel and Louisa. The content here should not be taken as medical advice.
The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professionals for any medical advice.
So my story is that I was thinking about, as I was sort of thinking about how I would say this, I realized that it's not that I've struggled with depression my whole life. Mm-hmm. I think it might have started more in my early 20s. Mm-hmm. So my first career was as a violinist. So I have a university degree in violin performance. And then in my final year, I developed an injury. And it was a tendinitis injury. And at that time, 20-something years ago, people didn't really, in New Zealand that is, people didn't really know how to heal from a tendinitis injury of this nature. And I mean, I knew that it was kind of like, as I look back on it, it was kind of like a higher self-intervention, mm-hmm. shall we say. Because it was kind of like, honey, this is not your path.
Yeah.
And I can look back now and see that, but at the time it was devastating. This was my life, music. Yeah. My parents are professional musicians. I grew up in, all the university professors had known me since I was a baby. Like this was my community and my life. I also was doing a lot of singing at the time, and so I went to Europe and I did a singing training. But that also didn't, I spent 2 years in full-time study, but I lost my voice. And I talked about this, I can't remember when. So I struggled with tendinitis, which basically stopped my career. And I loved playing the violin. It was for me a deep meditation, because when you play Bach and when you play Beethoven, it's like you are listening to the idea with a capital I, mm-hmm. the source of inspiration that these composers were bringing into some sort of being. But the being nature of music is so transient. So it's so spiritual in that sense. It's not very embodied. It's only embodied in sound for a moment.
Yeah.
Then trying to sing. And I had sung easily all my life. I was a part of an 8-voice a cappella group. We toured all over New Zealand. I was doing a lot of singing of new music with composers. I loved contemporary music and performing for, so composers were composing music for me to sing and play.
Wow.
I was really into it.
Yeah.
And it all stopped. And it was like, and I know the reason now, so let me just share the reason, I think, why this happened in this way. And it had to do with, it was not my path. Mm-hmm. It's not what I came here to do. It's almost like I needed that experience in order to come to understand that mental health is an art form. It's an art form. The way of engaging with the creative medium of your mind.
Yeah, because you had such a deep practice in the creative medium of
Yes.
violin and then your voice.
Yeah. The violin much more than the voice, because with the voice, it's all about the body and you sing, but the music is so simple. But the violin, the music becomes incredibly complex and rich and deep in ways that the voice is not the same at all.
Yeah. Okay, so
But
how did this
yeah.
lead into
depression? So, of course, I had an intimation that there was a reason why I should not continue down the path of being a professional musician like I really wanted. But of course, my 24-year-old self, or 22, I can't remember, somewhere in there, it took me many, many years of grieving this loss, right? And so, but I think even though that's reason enough to go into depression, when you lose your very identity and something that you love so much, I think the seeds were there much, much earlier when I, as I've done this work and certainly the inner child work that I've done over the years and then brought to clients, I can see that the seeds were sown. And I don't know if I would say that it was a family pattern, because it's not an obvious thing that you can see in my family, depression. But with so much of life, it's how we individually internalize our experiences and what we come into when we're born, culture, what's going on in society at the time, and all of that. And I think me as my own self had already those tendencies toward depression, where the lens through which I was looking and assessing the world, like I had stone wings around my heart. It's hard to explain. I don't think you have.
I have had bouts of depression.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've described it before as like a gray lens, where the world is just kind of has a gray tone to it, and that really resonated with me. I related to that from my experiences. Yeah,
and I remember New Zealand, where I grew up, is an astonishingly beautiful country. It is amazingly beautiful. And I was, standing on some ridge and I was looking down into virgin native forest. That means that it's never been logged, never been touched, right? So it is vibrant and rich with life. And there are tremendous amounts of green colors in New Zealand, like just so many different greens. It's not like a pine forest, not at all. It's like a jungle, because it's like subtropical type, climate. And I remember looking out over it thinking, I should be just filled with awe and wonder and reverence and astonishment and amazement at the glorious scene, but I was numb. I could not take it in. I could not receive it. That's what I mean by stone wings around my heart. So the seeds were there in my way of being and way of seeing and tendencies.
Yeah.
And then when I had these shocking experiences of from one day to the next, I mean, I was playing, 5 to 7 hours a day, and then lots of rehearsals on top of that. I had all these performances, and then from one day to the next, I was injured and I couldn't play at all. I couldn't turn doorknobs. I couldn't write. I'm left-handed. I couldn't write with my left hand.
Yeah.
I had to learn to write with my right hand. It was that bad, right? So from that point on, it was, a very depressing experience. It's not like I really grieved then. At that time, I was really too busy to notice the onset of the numbing, and the onset and the spreading and the habitual embedding of the gray. And then, I moved to America, and I had children, and I was married, and I had these beautiful little children. I lived in Maine. I was very alone. I was a stay-at-home mum. I had no community. I had very few friends, and they weren't particularly good friends. They were just, other mothers, and we sort of hung out together. But it was a very, very lonely time, and my husband was doing his master's in fine arts. It was just this time of it's almost like, I was surrounded by the love and the incredibleness of little children. And I think they saved me in that sense. But what really saved me was I did a course for a year, and it was a real turning point in my life. I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't done this course, because there was nowhere for me to go. After the end of my voice. There was nowhere for me to go, because I did not know. That was all I knew was music. That had been my life, all my life. And there was nothing else. So I went to Sacramento, California, and did a course with a teacher, Dennis Klochek, whom I think we often mention on this podcast, for a year, full-time study on the phenomenology of consciousness. And what he was teaching was using a phenomenological approach, a way of observing very exactly the phenomena of the soul. And he gave us tool after tool after tool in his way. And it saved my ass, I tell you.
So then when you moved to Maine, after you finished that course, you had these tools.
Yes.
These very deep, profound tools.
Yeah. But I had to, but it was hard work. Learning how to use them.
Yeah.
Because so now, 20 years later, I understand what he was talking about back then.
Yeah.
But it's taken me all this time to really understand them, wield them, and then teach them to others.
Yeah, bringing your own language, your own experience to them.
because they're no use if they're just concepts.
Yeah.
If they're not embodied in me.
Yeah.
If I haven't used them myself, if I don't understand it myself, then it's not really helpful to anyone else.
Yeah. And you often describe your depression as more of a dysthymia, which is like a lower level depression, but typically longer term.
So dysthymia is you're more often depressed than not. It's not like clinical depression. And I certainly was never diagnosed with depression, but it was pretty damn obvious. I didn't need to be diagnosed.
Yeah.
So it's a much milder form than something like bipolar or manic depression, which is on a different end of the spectrum. So anyway, but I dealt with it for 25 to 30 years of dysthymia. And I remember some moments of popping my head up out of the gray and seeing, oh my God, the world is so colorful. I cannot experience it. There was no capacity in me to see that. So I wasn't able to stay for very long up above the gray. Now that I'm out of that state and this is not a part of my lived experience anymore, I look back on all those years that I spent without, this experience of joy and motivation and, an expanded heart space as opposed to one that's got a stone wall around it. I have to have compassion for my younger self. And that, and also, and I'm sharing this because I want this to be useful to others. Yeah. That when you look back on your life and go, oh man, I spent all that time depressed. What a waste of a life. What a waste. And the truth of the matter is, if I hadn't gone through that experience, then I wouldn't have what I have now. Yeah. So I need to be, and I still have to work on this. I have to be grateful for the work that I did and the effort that I put into and the people who helped me along the way to get out of that. Yeah. So I think we all need to have compassion for our younger selves and what we went through and what we didn't know and what we couldn't do back then. Because we were there, we are now where we are. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. Yeah. And I really appreciate it. And I know that
sharing and openness and, vulnerability. It may not feel terribly vulnerable to you now, sharing it because you have so much courage, but it is a vulnerable
shared
act.
It a lot.
To share. So thank you, because it is such a healing force when we can share and relate to one another and hear stories of healing and coming through the other side. And clearly you have come through, and you're such a bright, joyful being. And I remember a couple of years ago when I was sort of in a struggling period, and I think I said to you, like, oh, you're just so like bright and optimistic, and I'm just really missing that. And you shared a little bit of your story. And at that time, I had no idea. I would never have guessed that you had struggled with any form of depression or seeing the gray or not, experiencing lots of joy. So you truly have come through. I can be a witness to that.
Yes, you know me quite a while.
Yeah. But depression is very common.
Yeah.
It's really common. It's just an expression that, people use even casually. Just, I feel depressed.
Yeah.
I feel this. It's not just a one-time sadness. It's like, it's a state.
Yeah.
And whether that's, on the milder end of dysthymia, which you described, to the more severe ends of bipolar and clinical depression. Youth are suffering from depression, I think, more and more.
Yeah.
I read that 4 million children between the ages of 12 and 17 have had a diagnosis of depression, and it's also more prevalent in women.
Right.
So I think maybe even 3 times more likely for dysthymia.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, for women to experience it. But it's very common, and I think a lot of the people that I know in my life have had at some time or another, gone through a phase where they, felt as though they were struggling with depression.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whether that's, and I think the majority of them not diagnosed, but it's something that, they know themselves.
Yeah.
And they know what they're dealing with.
I think we all universally understand it's almost like it's a feeling word.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than just a feeling word.
Exactly. Okay. So that takes us nicely into what we want to go into next, which is how we understand depression. And first we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and start to go into how we understand depression from our own experience, and then we'll take it from there.
Cool.
Hello, thank you for watching or listening to today's episode of Magenta FM. We want to take a moment and tell you that we have a lot of useful resources for you on our website at magenta.fm.
And actually, we want you to know that we're now regularly holding and hosting webinars. And in those webinars, we dive into some really juicy and challenging topics. We don't just do a bunch of downloading. We actually do exercises. We bring tools. We journal right there and then, and we do plenary, and of course, lots of Q&A. So you can go to our website at magenta.fm. You can sign up for the next available webinar, and we're holding those on a regular basis. So we hope to see you there.
And lastly, one of the best ways that you can support our show is by sharing it with friends or family who you think might find it helpful or interesting. So you can just pause the show right now, text your friend a link to magenta.fm/podcast, and there they can see all the episodes and listen to the most recent one or one that jumps out at them. And we really appreciate your support.
Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome back. So how we understand depression. We're going to cover sort of 2 areas or 2 contexts that help us understand depression. And there is a pretty unique take, I think, but really helpful.
Yeah, it's not going to be, it's rather unusual. So just stay with us.
There's lots of ways we all look at the world. We all have our, different perspectives, and there's lots of different ideas about things. And so we're excited to share our ideas.
Yeah. Yes.
And the first is one that we've talked about before, but we're going to revisit it in the context of depression. And that is the idea of a finished world. Yeah. And I'm just going to pass it to you to revisit that idea.
Yeah. So we really get into that in our episode on anxiety. That's the place to really do a deep dive into what we mean. So I'm just going to summarize it. And I really encourage you to go listen to the anxiety one. I realize it's an hour and 20 minutes long, but I think it's worth it because this is at the heart of much of what we struggle with mental illness or mental health. I don't like to call it mental illness because I don't think that we're actually ill. I think that we're struggling as human beings with a lot of really, really difficult stuff. And of course, we're going to be anxious and be depressed and struggle in all these ways. So the finished world is what we create in our minds and our hearts and in our beliefs. It's like the sum total of two main areas of our minds. One is our thoughts, our thoughting. That's a verb. Not thinking, because it's not really thinking, because we've already drawn conclusions. We already believe certain things. We already have certain assumptions and worldviews that we believe in. And
we're repeating thoughts that we have had before.
They're
and
not
before
new
and before
thoughts.
and
they're old thoughts.
Yes.
That's why I say thoughting as opposed to thinking. So you've got we call that mental picture forming. We've formed mental pictures about what we believe, maybe is another way to put it. So that plus the addictive nature of non-cognitive feelings. Now, we also do a whole episode about feelings, but I don't remember which one it was. I think it was in the first season.
Yeah.
That's also worth getting into because this is a very, very important thing to know about the nature of dysfunction that we're struggling with in ourselves, wound, and its healing. You've got to understand the difference between a cognitive feeling and a non-cognitive feeling. The reason being because what happens in this mental picture forming is that there are certain kinds of feelings that become attached to in that process. And those feelings are non-cognitive feelings. And non-cognitive feelings are addictive by nature. And what I mean by that is so feelings like anger, shame. I know it's strange, but shame is a very addictive feeling. We know who we are when we're ashamed, and so we dwell there. Yeah. Especially if we believe that we have something to be ashamed of. So if we believe we have something to be ashamed of course we're going to feel ashamed. Yeah. Self-pity is a big one. Yeah. Because I'm very familiar with that one. That seems to go hand in hand with depression. Yeah. Shame and self-pity, those two. But generally they're negative. Yeah. So when you have the combination of mental picture forming and addictive feelings, you have what's called a finished world. I'm calling it that. I get that from Georg Kuhlewint, who was a student of Steiner, also one of Dennis Klocek's mentors, and I've been to a number of his workshops. This finished world, a combination of mental picture forming and the addictive nature of these non-cognitive feelings, it's a doozy. Yeah. And like I say in the episode on anxiety, it's very difficult to shift, but it gets worse. I'm sorry. So
let's give some pictures of what does this look like as depression? For some, it might look like a thought or like a deeply ingrained belief that the world is, not safe, or there's nothing for me, or I'm not good enough. And
mine was, I don't matter.
That's what it is. You don't matter.
I don't matter. Yeah. No one cares about me. The world is indifferent to me.
And then coupled with feelings of
unworthiness, shame, doubt. So doubt has been my constant companion. All these years. Doubt in everything that do everything that I say.
Yeah.
Not that I had social anxiety, but that is one way it can manifest.
Yeah.
But because there's a lot of self-hatred wrapped up in all of that.
Yeah. And then you can see how a certain behavior would arise from this finished world. You know, if this is the world, I don't matter, I feel shame, I feel doubt.
I hate myself.
I hate myself. So why get out of bed?
Yes.
I'm just going to stay in bed.
Apathy.
And
Nihilism.
It makes so much sense that this is the picture that comes out of this finished world.
Yes. Yes, it's very laming.
Yes.
On the will. I remember when I had my first child, the house was a total mess. I could not organize myself out of a paper bag. I had no capacity there because of this depressive, nihilistic approach to life that I had, and I really had to work hard. And I tell you, if you can help your kids grow their will, clean their room, do the dishes, keep things tidy when they're children, so much easier than when you're an adult. It's very painful to grow your will when you're an adult. And couple that with a depressive personality, then it's hard.
Yeah.
But there's a second main area that we need to talk about as a kind of orientation into Rachel's and my world around all of this. And that is something that we're calling the being nature of depression, or any. Actually, this really does apply to pretty much any neurosis and also psychosis, because it can go all the way into a psychotic experience.
Yeah.
But the being nature. So what happens when we have this, when we formed this mental picture and we now have this finished, formed world of our mental pictures and our non-addictive feelings, because we are constantly pouring our attention there. That's why we're so exhausted. That's why we have no energy, because all of our attention is being sucked into a black void, right? And I have to say something about the nature of attention, and that is, it is everything. To where you attend, that's what grows. So if you're attending to your finished world, it grows.
Yeah.
But more than that, what we're talking about is an invisible realm. And I'm going to give it a name, or I'm going to give it there's some implication to this, and that is it has a spiritual nature. Your thinking and your feeling, this and the world that where the will impulses come from, this is an invisible realm, and it has a spiritual nature. This is why we are spiritual beings, having a physical experience. And the thing is, when you are in that world, thinking your thoughts, creating your finished worlds, feeling your feelings, you are creating a being. So your finished world takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And now it lives in you. And this is what makes depression so bloody difficult to heal, because it takes on a life of its own, and it can hijack you. Anytime there's a trigger, just like anxiety, it's easier to explain this in the context of depression than it is in the context of anxiety. But if you struggle with anxiety, I hope that you can sort of relate this to your own experience. This being nature of something in you, the finished world, taking on a life of its own through your attention, nourishing it, feeding it.
Yeah.
This is the reason why, on top of everything else, depression is so difficult to shift within you, because now it's living.
Yeah, I think that people really can relate to this idea of it taking on a life of its own.
Yeah.
Whether that's your depression or, it could be rage for somebody, this
just takes over.
Yeah. And it may not you may not see, it may not be easy to see that you have a choice in your attention.
Right.
You know, like your example of looking out over, you know, that canyon or the vista and, you know, noticing that your attention wasn't really going to this experience, but it was going to your own
numbness.
Yeah.
I couldn't open my heart to it.
Yeah. So, you know, attention might be a difficult concept for people to realize that they are actually bringing their attention to these feelings and to these thoughts and to this way of seeing the world. And you may feel powerless and like, well, I don't know, you know, I can't put my attention to anything else.
Yeah.
It is still pointing your attention, whether you feel like you have a lot of choice in it or not.
Yeah.
It's still where your attention is going.
Yes. And let me just confirm the challenge that's before us when we're struggling with depression, that we don't have the forces, we don't have the strength of spirit to take, you know, as we are. That's why the depression has taken on a life of its own. And so what we have to do is find our way out of that. And what we have to do is, because we've created this being, we have to work with the fact that we have a spiritual being that is now being fed by our finished world making.
Yeah.
It takes a special approach. You can't just ignore it. You can't suppress it. You can't pretend it's not there. You have to confront it. And what is needed is not to tell it to go away or deny it or anything. What you need to do is redeem it. So with your love and your compassion, that's the only thing that is going to heal that being nature of something like depression. So on the one hand, you have to get to know, just like we talked about in the anxiety episode, you have to get to know the mental picture forming and undo that, and to get to know the nature of non-cognitive feelings and transform those. You also have to redeem this being that is now a part of you.
Yeah. And
it's not you.
Right.
But you have brought it into being.
Yeah. So that phrase that people use, oh, this has taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
It's very accurate.
It's a real experience.
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
very real.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to call it like it is. I can imagine people would go, oh, I don't like the idea of, that sounds going a little far. But I want us to start to get used to the idea that we're working in spiritual realms.
Yeah.
When we are thinking, when we are feeling, when we want to will something, these are spiritual capacities in us.
Yeah.
And they can be used for good and they can be used for ill.
I want to share that story that I shared to you really briefly.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of off topic from depression, but it's a really good picture that just happened recently. So I have been struggling with a little bit of worry around something in my life.
Yeah.
And, or my husband and I both have, I should say, but I've been, holding this kind of worry and concern. And I had noticed that anytime my husband has been making a mistake in the last, just 2 weeks, he'll make a little mistake, just normal. We all make mistakes, we forget the car keys or we whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just got me, it just hijacked me because it fed into, these other beliefs and concerns.
Mental pictures.
Yeah. And then the feelings that are addictive for me, which are disappointment and distrust.
Yes. Right. Anger.
Or
resentment.
Yeah. Both of those.
Okay. My
attention would just go to that one thing. And it was totally blown up proportion, right? Because it's not nothing is different. It's just because I'm carrying this mental picture that I would, go to this place so quickly. And, I had to fess up more than one time to my husband, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I did it again. I'm just, it's really about this.
Right.
And, I'm working to redeem this, this, being nature that I'm carrying, these mental pictures, transform this
right.
and get to the root of it.
Right.
But it totally could hijack me. My attention could go in so many different directions. And it was easily getting, fed into this destructive, unhealthy, unhelpful,
blaming
direction.
Yep.
And it could take on a life of its own. Suddenly I was just like in this state of being pissed off.
Yep.
And so you really can observe this phenomenon in
a lot of different ways.
Yes.
We need these pictures so that people can relate this to their own experience. That's that's really important. My tendency was always to be inward focused, self-blame, self-hatred. The picture you just gave was like outward focused, but it's also just as possible to do the same with myself and judging myself. And in social anxiety, it's obviously all about yourself, not necessarily about blaming others or being angry with anyone else, just about how you suck.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think we did a good job giving a picture of these two different contexts for how we look at depression. And then we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and talk about how we heal.
Yes.
And transform and redeem.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you feel overwhelmed, dissatisfied, or exhausted? Would you like to have the strength to face whatever life throws at you with courage and calm? Many people believe that the solution to chronic issues in their lives is just figuring out a way to change their external reality or popping a pill so they can finally be satisfied. Unfortunately, this is a fantasy. The truth is there is another way, one that is within your reach, and it can be found in an unexpected place that chances are you've never considered or known how to access. You need to become a master of your presence. A more elevated presence means that you are not so tossed about by your reactions, your emotions, or fears. You're more free from anxiety and stress. And as a consequence, your creative energies that were bound up with chronic stress and dissatisfaction are released to become forces now available to you in far greater abundance. You'll have the capacity to love more generously, lead with greater wisdom and courage, and show up more fully for your community and your purpose. And the beautiful thing is, you are in turn increasingly met in that elevated space that you've created via nothing other than your presence. Magenta's Elevated Presence Masterclass will take you on a 21-day journey into the magic of a daily practice designed to ground you, calm you, and nourish you spiritually. Like the monastic training methods of old, we immerse you in what it actually takes to evolve. We do this by tapping into unconventional techniques derived from thousands of years of Western esoteric spiritual insight and practice. Don't put this off any longer. Sign up today. Go to magenta.fm/elevated presence.
Okay, welcome back. And we are going to dive into how we heal. Thank goodness.
There's hope.
There is hope. We're going to present it as steps, but we want to say that they might fall in a slightly different order for you. So we're going to be continuing on Louisa's journey today. So sort of using her story as a template. But these steps don't always fall in this, specific order.
Yeah, everybody has their own very unique path of healing. And so sometimes it's like we take one step and then we have to take a second step, but then it's back to the first step. And, so it's just different orders. But step one, I think, is kind of foundational, and that is, what are you eating? So if you struggle with depression, it's very important that you clean up your diet, get rid of all junk food, only eat organic food. I can't stress this enough. And clean up your personal care products and your house cleaning products. No more conventional. Don't go to Walmart. Don't go to conventional grocery stores anymore. There's so many products on the shelves that are greenwashing. They're still full of hormone disrupting this and that and stuff that is poisoning you. So get it off your skin, get it out of your house, get it off your body.
Because these things have a known effect.
Yes,
on
it's so
our
well
mental
documented.
state, on our hormones.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very well documented. This is not conspiratorial or radical in any way.
Yes, and this is the rest of your life.
Yeah.
There are so many poisons, and we are being poisoned. So I don't want to say any more about that. I think there's plenty. The second step, and this is where it's kind of like, I'm not sure if this is actually the second step, because the third step is really, but also the fourth step. But anyway, let me just say, the second step is what we call name your wound. And what we mean by that is you are going to need to get to know the true name of what is behind your depression, which is what we call wound. You know that you found the true name of what's keeping you stuck in your depression when you really understand it in its entirety. In other words, you understand and you can see the forming of those mental pictures. You can see exactly the feelings that are tied to those mental pictures, and you can see it all sort of playing out in you in all the different areas of your life, in your current reality. Now, it is true that a part of this process is that you go back in time and you look at the origin story of how this all came into being. That is an important part of the process, but it's not as important as getting to know your current mental picture forming. In my work with clients, I always started with current reality, especially if trauma was involved. Mm-hmm. It's very important that you don't, and I've said this before, I'm sure, and I'll say it again, that you don't go into the original traumatic experiences or events and start there. That is not the thing to do. And this is well known now in, trauma research, but it hasn't been well known for a long time. But it's the same in any situation. Don't try and figure out what happened in the past and what happened to you as the way of healing. What you do is you figure out how is it playing out now, all the habits, all the mental picture forming, all the feelings.
The conclusions that you're making about the world,
yes.
The conclusions you're making about the other people in your life.
Yes.
Or
the
yourself.
Beliefs that you have,
yeah.
Your worldview,
yes.
What you assume about others, what you assume about yourself. All of this is where you start. Now, I've certainly heard people say to me, I've been in therapy for years. I know all of this. Well, if you are still in struggling, chances are you don't have the true name. You haven't gotten into the heart of the matter. And you'll know that you have because it doesn't have power over you anymore. That's the key. Mm-hmm. That's how you know when you have the number on this thing that has taken a hold of you. And so now we come to step 3, which is drilling into an aspect of this process, which is feelings. So I know as someone who struggled with depression, feelings have been hard for me to access because of these stone walls and wings around my heart. I didn't really know what I felt other than depressed, right? I didn't know that I was ashamed. I didn't know that I was full of self-hatred. Because I didn't experience it as like something as strong as self-hatred. I just didn't realize how little I thought about myself, of myself, how little I believed and trusted myself, how little I had faith in myself. And I would say that was self-hatred because it is a sort of archetypal experience of the soul. There's 3. There's self-hatred, there's doubt, and there's fear. And we've talked about this before too. Yeah. But it's worth repeating. These are archetypal feelings, and chances are what your non-cognitive feelings will fit in a cluster under one of those 3. Yeah. So I had to really work at getting to know my feelings as a part of this process of trying to discover the true name of my wound. And on the way, I had to learn about the difference between cognitive and non-cognitive because I spent a lot of time in self-pity. And self-pity and the pity party is a very dangerous trap to get stuck in. And I was stuck in it for many years. And I once had this, have I shared this story? I once had this experience. I was sitting in the hot tub with my husband and I was crying and sobbing about how worthless I was and worthless my life was. And I had this experience of this picture come to mind of this being who had these big manga-sized eyes, just full, just welling with pity for me. And I was like, yes, because I'm just so, it's just so tragic. But then when I woke up the next morning, this picture arose in me. I remembered this experience in the hot tub, and I realized that being was mocking me. It was not actually, it was showing me a mirror of my own, the extent and the ridiculousness of this pity party I was in. And it was such a strong experience that I never did it again.
Wow.
Yeah. Words kind of fail me, but it was such a strong experience of my own mirroring back to me, my own self-pity, that I have never gone there again. If I do, a little bit, because it sometimes can happen, if I stub my toe and
but
then,
not like,
but not like I did.
pieces.
Not like wallowing. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Step 4. So now we have an unholy alliance between your mental picture forming and your non-cognitive feelings. So really the idea here is that you've got to start to see the dance between these two. You've got to start somewhere. So I'm saying start with the mental picture forming. Start with getting to know what you believe, what you're concluding, all of that. And then work in this feeling, because it's hard to access what you're actually feeling. You can use nonviolent communication techniques. Like we have lists of feeling words in one of our podcasts, and I think it might be episode 5. If you go to episode 5 on YouTube or on our website, magenta.fm/podcast, episode 5 has a download there of feeling words. And so you can use that to identify what you might be feeling, just whatever resonates with you, write it down.
Yeah.
Start getting fluent.
Yes.
And if you're depressed, it's going to be tough and it's going to be shame. I feel shame and apathy. But over time, you will be able to start to access more nuanced, because it's like learning a new language and getting to know this realm. So you've got to start to do this work of observing, and if you can, journaling. Journaling is a very, very powerful tool for this work. Journaling the mental picture forming process in you, and journaling around the feelings that you're feeling. And notice how often you go into non-cognitive feeling land. That's very important. And what you're actually doing, and this is really what I want to say about step 4, is you're starting to build this capacity for what we call the witness. Actually, Carl Jung coined the term. The witness is a muscle in your higher self. And the more you're able to observe objectively, without judgment, without assessment, without conclusion drawing, just observe. This is phenomenology. The more you're going to be able to, the more you observe, the more you observe. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And the sooner that you can, bring some kind of witness consciousness to the vortex that can be non-cognitive feelings.
Yes.
So it may, in the beginning, not be until like the day after that you're like, oh my gosh, I was just in like a vortex of, apathy and self-pity and, group sadness yesterday.
Yeah.
And, over time, the more you build this muscle, and like you said, using your journal is a very, is one of the many ways that we can strengthen that muscle of the eye. You can get to the point where you're, starting to go into a fit of anger.
Yeah.
And the witness can come in right then, and help you see, this is that vortex, and I'm just going to be in this state. If I keep following this path, I know just where it's leading me.
That's right.
So
you become more and more objective about it.
Yeah.
And you get closer to naming the wound.
Yes.
So that's step 4. Step 5. Step 5 is where, you really need to start meditating. If you are depressed, please, for the love of God, start meditating. We've said this before, and we're going to say it again. Meditating is the strength training for the soul. Yes, doing the work of naming the wound is also strength training, but if you only stare at your wounds and you are not strengthening your light, the wounds will suck you in, because you don't, right now, if you are depressed, you don't have the forces to pull yourself out of it. Meditation is where you build those forces.
Yeah.
And by light, I mean you can strengthen your capacity to feel cognitive feelings. You can strengthen your capacity to think what you want to think instead of something thinking itself in you.
Yeah.
In other words, the being nature.
Yeah.
Hijacking your system through mental picture forming, which pulls the addictive feelings along with it.
Mm-hmm.
So meditation, please get started with that. But don't just do any old meditation. And please don't work with meditations that are about changing your brain states. There's so much of that out there. When it comes to this particular strength training of the soul, which accompanies this kind of personal development work and healing, really the meditation you want to focus on are ones that are really only about helping you get a handle on what you're thinking, and that are helping you get a handle on what you're feeling.
Yeah.
So that you can start to experience agency there. Now, if you're changing your brain states, that is not what you're doing.
You're not cultivating cognitive feelings.
Now, if you are dealing with trauma and things like that, it may have helped you with that. I can't say. And I don't want to say, don't do it.
Yeah.
And this is all my own opinion. But when it comes to thinking and feeling and where will comes from, these are spiritual realms, and they need appropriate tools. Otherwise, we have what's called spiritual bypass, and there's an awful lot of that going on. And so I see my role as providing tools and methods that I know are safe.
So spiritual bypassing, I just want to pause on that idea.
Yeah.
Spiritual bypassing is basically trying to solve a issue which we believe is rooted in, your spiritual nature, but going about it in a way that doesn't address the spiritual aspect.
Or the root of it, or the cause of it.
Yes, exactly. So it just bypasses around and tries to kind of hack the system.
Yes.
There may be, some temporary relief.
It might seem to work.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe that's the way to put it.
Yeah. But there's other, issues and unintended consequences.
Yes. There's a cost.
Yeah.
To bypass.
Yeah.
Yes. There's really only one way, and that's to go through, and redemption is the right word, even though it comes with religious overtones. I want to reclaim that word and take it back from the religion, because it really is about redemption. And redemption doesn't happen without your participation and the participation of your I.
Yeah.
I have not found meditations that I believe are really good, that I can recommend or that I can suggest or whatever, for this kind of healing work that we go into in this podcast. The only person I know who's bringing that is us. And our course is called Elevated Presence Masterclass. And it's all about establishing a successful meditation practice that you can sustain, hopefully for the rest of your life. It's basic soul hygiene stuff. And it's really designed to be in support of this healing work.
Strengthening the thinking, strengthening the cognitive feelings.
Yes, and supporting the will through the rhythm of the practice.
Yeah, and all of that together strengthens the muscle of the I.
Yes, and it's all done. It's all done in a very logical. You can think it through. You can see everything about it. Way, lots of common sense. I promise.
there's no leaps of faith that you have to take to understand, what the idea that we're presenting and why it works.
Yes, exactly. There's no theta brainwaves involved.
Yeah.
If you're interested, go check it out. It's magenta.fm/. elevated presence, and get on the wait list. Because what we do is we open enrollment for a few days. Anybody who's interested can enroll during those few days, but then we close enrollment. And then for the next 21 days, everyone is practicing together and going through this process.
Yeah, so you're kind of held in this community, and
yes,
we're there, by your side, forging, these muscles and, working to fit this into their busy lives and deal with, what do I do if I have kids, struggling with this aspect. And there's this whole people who are on, a whole group that's on the journey with you. And it's really supportive.
Yeah, it is really supportive, and we really help each other. So we really encourage you to check that out and see, because on the path of healing, meditation is a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
So that's enough of that. So step 6. Step 6 is, this almost perhaps could have been step 1, but anyway, step 6.
I know, really, we could have reframed it as part 6.
Yeah,
now that we're going through it, I'm like, it really is parts. Each of these are these different parts, and you're going to, make your own sort of, recipe and,
that's right.
and stages. And like you said before, you're going to do a little bit of part 1, and then you may revisit part 2, and then you go into part 5, and then you revisit part 2. Yes, exactly. So, but this is another part of it.
Yeah, but we did want to structure it out so you really understand all the components. So step 6 is about nourishing and feeding your soul with lawful pictures. Now, what do I mean by that? You see, the thing about mental picture forming is that that's a picture that you're feeding your soul, right? It's not a good picture. So what you can do is begin to feed your soul with pictures that are lawful, that they are full of the lawfulness and beauty of the cognitive world or the natural world. And so, for instance, reading novels that are full of these kinds of lawful pictures, like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
That is full of these beautiful lawful pictures and stories that follow these the laws of harmony and structure and beauty and goodness and truth. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to describe it. But also, when you're watching TV, so much of TV and movies are junk, and they are feeding the wrong parts of you. Yeah,
that's what was really coming up for me. Like, if you have this mental picture that the world is, unsafe, or that you don't matter in the world, and then you watch a bunch of movies that are really dark in nature, and there's a lot of dark,
like horror movies,
cinema, and or even not necessarily horror movies, but there's still just a theme of
the
kind of the dark underbelly of violence or neglect. That might be relatable, and that's why people turn to those.
Yeah.
But if that's the only picture, that you're putting into your mind or your soul, then it's going to be very difficult to start to shift your beliefs that the world is in fact safe.
Yes, you're feeding the wrong monster there.
Yeah.
But that does remind me of something, and that is, how addictive those kinds of TV shows and movies are. Well, I think that's another piece of maybe proof, you could even call it, of the addictive nature of these feelings, these non-cognitive feelings. We crave content from that world.
Yeah.
That's why we watch it.
Yeah.
So this is dark stuff, So feed yourself with lawful, with cognitive feelings, with beautiful stories. Like if you're going to watch a movie, watch the Miyazaki movies.
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
Yeah. And
so nourishing pictures is how we are summarizing part 6.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've had part 1 through 6. Now we have part 7, which is the culmination of this all. And do you remember in the beginning of this episode, we talked about redemption? So what we've just been through is how you redeem the being nature of what's going on. This is what you have to do. You have to get the true name of what you're suffering with. And you have to see this being for what it is. And in your mind's eye, you have an imaginative picture, not a fantasy picture, but an imaginative picture of the shape and the feel of this being that has taken you over.
Yeah.
That has a life of its own in you. And the more you do this, the idea here is that you grow in compassion for what you've been up against all this time.
Yeah.
And that you heal from the self-hatred, from the self-doubt, and from the fear. Mm-hmm. And that process means that, and this is hard for me to explain, but I will try. When you do that, what happens is you begin to empty out. And so this is my experience. I'm speaking, and I'm trying to find the right words to describe this. But as you face your wounds and you heal them through understanding, through cognition of your eye, that's the only force in the world that really heals. You grow in empathy, the supreme healing force of the heart. And what happens is that is redemption. And then the things that have been filling you up and keeping you full begin to empty out. So all that pain, all the wounding, all the suffering, all the, in my case, self-pity begins to empty out. And then there's room.
Yeah.
There's room there to be able to receive love from another person.
Yeah.
And the more you empty out, the more receptive you are. And what does that mean? That means your heart is able to open. Mm-hmm. And that is how you heal from depression.
Yeah.
Your heart is able to open because it's emptied out of what it's been full of.
Yeah.
And so redemption is that process.
Yeah.
You lay on the altar all this wound and all this suffering and all this grief and all this darkness and stickiness, and you're empty. Mm-hmm. And you don't know, but the problem is you don't know who you are anymore, because you discover in that process, there's two things you discover. The first thing you discover is you don't know who you are anymore, because you were so identified with your wounding. This is as a consequence of the addictive nature of non-cognitive feelings and the addictive nature, therefore, of the mental picture forming. That's who you are.
Yeah.
You hear that often enough. And you realize that was all just personality and construct. And as you empty out of all of that, you don't know who you are anymore. And then things get a little like, your foundation has to shift.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an earthquake.
Yeah.
But you have to empty out first. This is the second thing. You have to empty out first before you can start to discover who you actually are.
Yeah. What you're actually capable of.
Yeah.
And
what you're
the
actually
gifts
made
that
of.
you have to give.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's important to consider both of those steps, because I think when we talk about, empathy and compassion, mm-hmm. I think a lot of people can carry sort of a distorted picture of what that actually means. This picture of your hot tub character is coming up for me right now, so I'm going to use this.
Yeah, please
so
do.
Take this character, this picture of this person, mm-hmm. Who's this big-eyed, mm-hmm. sad tears, mm-hmm. Tragic. My life is tragic. This is all. Can you just even believe how terrible this is?
Yeah.
Just huge crocodile tears coming out.
Yes.
You can have compassion for this being in their sadness and misery. But if your compassion is just okay, they're there. I feel really bad for you. And, I feel really sorry for you. Uh-huh. But you don't see that is not actually who they are, and that they actually are capable of so much more.
Yeah.
And you just can almost play into their...
Yes, that's
to
right.
their, neuroses or depression mm-hmm. or this state. Mm-hmm. Then you're really doing them a disservice.
Yeah. It's like pity.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So don't confuse those two things, of pity and compassion, because in compassion, there's also seeing the highest potential.
Yes. In the other. Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so important that there's all of these, pieces come together, these steps come together, like you said, to start emptying out and to start making space for something new to emerge.
Yes,
and that's really the redemption.
Right. Exactly.
And, compassion is a piece of that.
Empathy is a hard state to achieve. It's like because you have emptied out of your own stuff enough that you're able to receive another person into and it's like you walk in their shoes and you live their pain and but you're not doing that because you're pitying them or feel above them in any way, shape or form, but you really see, with a capital S.
Yeah.
And you have to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
And this is why the true name has a magical quality to it.
Yeah.
Because when you finally have the true name, and of course I don't mean a word.
Yeah.
Though I remember someone saying to me, someone close to me, that they finally did have the true name of what they were, of their being nature. What is it? It's hatred. That's what she told me. She's like, it's one word. And that being has accompanied her all her life. She had a great deal of childhood abuse from an alcoholic mother. And she was still, this is part of her processing, but that word really for her encapsulated this whole experience for her. So maybe, it could be one word, but what we mean by that is a holistic comprehension.
Yes.
A holistic cognition of this wound and how it plays out in you. I have one more thing to say, and again, hinting at a future episode, and that is in this process of emptying out of everything that you thought you were, so that who you really are can start to be revealed to you. There's a lawful principle of of healing at work, and that is reversal. So we're going to talk about that, I think, we might even talk about it in the next episode. So some traditions have called it the great giveaway. And it's the process of you becoming a vessel for a greater love. And in some little known Christian esoteric streams, the picture in the Christ mysteries is a picture of this process. I mean, there's so much more to the Christ mysteries than just this, but just, the picture of sacrificing your lower self for the sake of the resurrection to be, you've got to die to these wounds. These wounds have to be sacrificed. Yeah. And it's painful. Yeah. Okay, I speak from experience. It's really painful to let go of your identity. You identify so. I know I identified so closely with being a musician. Yeah. And I had to let that die. And it took me 20 years. I still have to go back and revisit that sometimes. Even recently, I will say. And then you have to die to, in my case, my self-pity. I had to let my depression go. And it was very, very difficult to do because I was so closely identified with it. So sacrifice.
Who am I? Who the heck am I if I'm not depressed?
And
or who am I if I'm not distrusting of all of the world and only, relying on myself? Like,
are you speaking from experience?
Who I am. Yes, exactly. That's very much my experience. Yeah. And then there's sort of this limbo period where you're like, okay, I'm going to feel my way, forward here. And it's very uncomfortable. And I'm not sure where this is going to take me.
Yes, there's a lot of unknowns. Yeah. And that's the death. That's the entombment experience. So you have this experience of being crucified by your own wounds, and then the entombment of, I don't know, I'm in limbo. I don't know who I am anymore. Yeah. And then there's the resurrection, but the resurrection doesn't happen if you don't do the work properly, right? That you don't have the true name, that you haven't reckoned with and overcome your tendency toward the addictive lure of, non-cognitive feelings. But then and in a way, the resurrection doesn't happen because you make it happen. It's given to you, but only if you're ready. It's a gift. It's grace. It requires faith that it will happen, but only if you do your work. And this is why entombment is really difficult too. And so, and this resurrection process is tied to the birthing of the spirit embryo, which is the birth of your higher self in you.
Yeah.
And these are deep mysteries. And these are secrets that have been nurtured and kept safe for many, many centuries by spiritual streams that were so badly persecuted that hardly anyone knows about them. Like, we know a lot about Eastern esoteric streams.
Yeah.
They were not persecuted the way that many of these Western esoteric streams were.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And so many of these mysteries of the Christ mysteries are not known because they were persecuted by the Christian religious heads of the time.
Yeah.
But also the incredible mysteries of the divine feminine and the Black Madonna in particular that really lived and thrived, in Western Europe and in many places around the world. Also in the Black Madonna mysteries of South America. Many of those were mercilessly persecuted and destroyed. The mysteries around Mary Magdalene and the Cathars.
Yeah, and so much is, reemerging now, which is very interesting,
very exciting.
Like texts that were, only a few were preserved from a period of time when they were all, forced to be burned and destroyed.
Right.
But, these emerging texts coming from different parts of the world that are like totally, aligned in their language.
2,000 years later.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even just like within the last couple of decades, like, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene being published finally after, even though they found it, over a century ago, but then even then there was all of these hurdles for it to be published.
Wow.
So there was this fight for, this text to emerge, which really has to do with the inner path, the inner resurrection, as you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, she's a fascinating lady.
Yes.
And she really embodies these steps in her journey, in her story, is hidden so much of this content and wisdom.
Yeah.
She lived it. So this is the work.
Yeah.
And it's possible. I testify that it's possible. And let me just say one thing about manic depression. So I would, I've worked with people who struggle with manic depression, and it's really interesting to see just how much this oscillation is a kind of protective mechanism. But you can see that in the manic state, you are taken over by the manic state. But then when you're in the depressive state, because it's this oscillation between these two extremes, you're totally taken over by it. I mean, there is nothing you can do to get out of either of these states.
Yeah,
and
how do you
what's
describe
coming.
the manic state?
Where you, it's like you're on top of the world. I don't have any technical, I'm just repeating what I've heard directly from my clients. That's how I prefer to understand.
Yeah.
On top of the world, you have a hard time sleeping. You can't sleep, or you sleep very little. And you're just in this manic state of getting things done, whatever your tendency is around, being hyper awake, hyper alert, hyperactive, that kind of thing. And, for some people, it's they feel very productive, and it's just such a relief because before that they were in a deep, dark place.
Yeah.
Where they basically weren't doing anything. And then they go to the other extreme.
Yeah.
And so, when you look at that, it can be easy to just assume that it's somebody's just ill. There's something wrong with them. But I would say that if we approach it with common sense, we can totally understand, we can understand why we do this, why we go from these states. I mean, if you are in such a dark place and then you come into this manic state, the relief is, can you imagine? It's like being let out of a cage.
Yeah.
And you're in the sunlight and you do not want to leave. You don't want to sleep. You don't want to go back there. You'll do anything other than to go back there where there's suicidal ideation, that kind of annihilating experience. So it's understandable, and all the people that I ever have talked to who are in that state, they had trauma in their background. Mm-hmm. So no bloody wonder they had these experiences. So I think that even for someone, if you're asking the question, well, I'm bipolar, can this help me? I say, yes, it can help you. These are the steps. It doesn't change the nature of the path of healing. And it absolutely is possible for you to heal. Yeah. And you can approach this with really great common sense, and you can find a way. Yeah. And here's a way. Here's a possible way.
Okay, well, on that note, let's just do a little bit of a recap for people.
Yeah.
So we started with Louisa's story and of her, journey with depression and dysthymia. And then we went into a picture of how we understand depression. Starting with the finished world, which is the mental pictures of our thoughts and our conclusions and our beliefs and all these things that we're carrying from for a long time, typically thoughts that have been repeating that, arise, and they create this finished world where things are fixed and set.
Yep.
And then our feelings, our addictive feelings come in and get intertwined with this finished state. And then we're, even more set. Then we're in a state, we've got the thinking and the feelings, and it's, familiar and probably on repeat. So getting to know this picture of the finished world as a phenomena that you can see in depression as well as in other, challenges, whether that's anxiety or, relationship issues or, all kinds of areas in your life. You can see how the mental picture forming is happening. And then you went into
the being nature,
which is how this state kind of takes on a life of its own. The more attention that we are giving to this state, to these feelings and to these thoughts, and, confirming our beliefs, further and further, even if we're like being very selective about what we choose to pay attention to which is going to confirm our beliefs.
Yeah.
Then, that feeds this being nature, this life of its own.
Yeah.
And so now you have this, this being that is, with you, but you can kind of tell it's also not you, because it sort of takes over. And then you're like, oh, now I'm, this Rachel, like, okay, I much prefer the Rachel,
that's not triggered.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, working with this concept of this being nature, and then we went into the steps or parts of healing.
The road,
I'll just review them really quickly. So we had the physical body. That's kind of its own, its own thing, its own category, because it's dealing with like a different, part of our anatomy as a person. It's our physical piece.
It's just one part
but
of
we
our
don't
anatomy.
Want to leave it out. Yeah. Yes, it's only one part. And then the other areas are more dealing with our soul, which is where, we bring a lot of our tools at Magenta. So another part is naming the wound. So seeing how, the beliefs are operating in you in present day, and, eventually working into, the origin story, but with a lot of caution, and really working on the present day first.
Yes.
And then the next part is around our feelings and starting to learn, about our non-cognitive feelings, about these, noticing these feelings that wash over us and have us sort of sucked into this state. So getting to know these feelings, and we forgot to mention that there are some positive feelings that can be non-cognitive in nature or addictive in nature. So I'm just going to share these now. So it's not only self-pity, blame, anger, despair, sadness. These are, common ones you experience. But the non-cognitive feelings or these addictive feelings that kind of take over us can also be smugness, pride, vanity, self-satisfaction, kinds of, pleasures that are about the fulfillment of a temporary urge, but they leave you longing for more. Mm-hmm. There's not, it's like a on the surface level satisfaction that doesn't like deeply, quench our needs. So there's sort of a hungry ghost is a term that's used as like, you just need more and more and more, if you're trying to like sustain yourself on the feeling of pride, then you're gonna have to like, keep refilling that over and over. And so the healing journey here with the feelings is getting to know them. And we talk about the list of feeling words is on our website.
And journaling, lots of journaling.
Journaling helps bring some awareness to, these feeling states.
Yeah, bring the word, the power of the word to your healing journey.
Yeah.
That's why journaling, you may not like writing, I'm sorry, but you have to do it. Use the power of the word.
Yeah.
Articulation.
Yeah. Sometimes you can just put pen to paper and like you can be totally triggered and you start writing and it's like, there's just like a clarification and it's like, I can't even write the triggered thoughts. Like, it's like there's like I can only get so far before I'm like, oh, this is like a lie. I'm like lying, this isn't actually true. It's like the truth is like.
I've had that experience.
Yeah, I have had that experience too. So it's very powerful that the truth wants to come out when you start writing, Because if you're venting to somebody, you can just like spat off all kinds of ideas or, untruths.
Yes.
Okay, so that's feelings. Get to know your feelings.
And that was part 3.
Part 3, step 3. Step 4 is, seeing how these two areas of the feelings and the mental pictures are weaving together.
Yes, and this is the practice of developing your witness, which is a muscle in you that is related to your eye, your cognition.
Yes. That takes us nicely into step 5, which is meditation.
Yes.
And that is like the number one place that we encourage you to strengthen your eye, strengthen this muscle through specific kinds of meditation that are, spiritual in nature and help you strengthen your cognition, your thinking, and then also strengthening your feelings. So strengthening the feelings that are a counterforce, to those negative or addictive feelings that we just listed. And then step 6, nourish your soul with pictures that are lawful and beautiful and healing and really show, the goodness of that exists in the world.
Yes, and those pictures, like for instance, wild nature, get out there into wild nature. They feed and nourish your soul with how it's supposed to move.
Yeah.
So when you're in a state of depression, your soul doesn't know how to move in a loving, expansive way anymore. It's closed off.
Yeah.
So being in nature on a regular basis, it's really great to go on a media fast altogether. most important of all is spiritual content.
Yeah.
So if you could read writings by mystics and spiritual masters, and spiritual content is very nourishing to the soul, and it really shows it, like Saint Teresa of Avila, what she writes about the interior castle, helps your soul remember how to move properly in healthful ways.
Yes. The last part that we covered is the redemption that can occur through your own journey with everything we just described.
Yeah, all those steps.
All of those steps can take this state that you find yourself in again and again, that, may even have become your identity, and you can empty out the unhealthy, the stuck, the repetitive, and give space for, redemption to come through that, out of that.
Yes.
And it's a bit of a mystery, what is going to come forth. And it's like you said, it's like a gift, it's like grace. But something will come.
Yes.
You will not just remain an empty vessel forever.
But also it's good. Being an empty vessel is very humbling.
Yes.
And humbleness is a great receptor.
Yes,
a
true.
Field of receptivity.
Yeah, very well put.
And we talked about in the Christ mysteries is a picture of this process, and how Mary Magdalene herself embodied this in her story and her actions of emptying out, sacrificing the lower, being in the entombment of not knowing who you are and if you'll ever come out of it, if you'll ever be resurrected, and then finding and then being able to give birth to your higher nature, your higher self, sacrificing the lower for the sake of the higher.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful picture, huh?
It is a beautiful picture. Yeah. Okay, well,
that's it.
That's it. Yeah. So please, if you're not already signed up for our newsletter, we have some really cool things planned for the month ahead, and we want to include you in some, very special things that we're doing only for our email subscribers. Offerings that we think are going to be supportive and helpful and free. So please go to our website, magenta.fm, and just scroll down to the bottom of the page, and it's right there in the footer. Sign up our email list, and you won't regret it. We share lots there.
Yes.
And then, as always, share this podcast with a friend or family member who you think might find it interesting.
Yeah, we want to get the word out.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll see you next time.